You are listening to the Into the Wilderness podcast with me, one of your hosts, Byron Pace, and sitting beside me, Daryl Pace, my brother, from a very, very snowy Scotland, but not as snowy as it was a week ago, because there was a couple of days where it was actually almost not possible to get to our office or our houses back from our office by the end of the day.
The country did melt down. If anyone was watching the news out with the UK, you would actually think the apocalypse had happened.
They might be laughing at us. The people from Alaska listen to this show.
So I'm not even joking, right? So the snow was, I would say, bad in regions, and particularly bad in some of the places we lived, and it was actually the drifts rather than the depths of the snow that was the problem. So some of the drifts were 12, 15 foot tall and blowing across the roads, you couldn't see or you couldn't get past them. But actually laying on the ground must have been an inch, if that.
Some places were a bit more than that. Some places had 6 inches.
Yeah, maybe. Well, no, where around where we live.
Yeah, where we live.
And from that 1 inch on the ground and the bit of drifting, we ran out of fuel in the entire region. We ran out of bread, we ran out of milk, the shelves were empty, there was no fruit or veg, and honestly, it was like the end of days.
It does make me a little concerned, because it was
only...
And
gas, the country was running out of gas.
We were, yeah. It was probably only about a week of kind of bad weather. 1 week, everything ground to a halt. What on earth would we do if there was actually a proper disaster? This isn't a disaster, this is just a fluctuation in winter weather. We do get snow here, but not normally quite that much. It's the most I can remember for probably about 15 years.
And the amount of pillocks on the road in cars,
Pillock might need translated for our American listeners.
Idiot. On the road, just thinking that. Like, I was thinking twice in a four-wheel drive. Barnes got a Land Rover Defender as well, and he wasn't making up certain places. And we were thinking about, this is actually quite serious, but we were prepared. I had tow ropes. I had those things you can lay on the ground for more grip. I've got spades, buckets, everything in my car. So I'm fairly prepared, and then you've got someone like in the Ford car trying to get up the same road as you, and they're surprised why they can't make it.
Well, I actually have a request.
And no tyres on. I've got off-roading tyres. Yeah. You've got off-roading tyres.
But I've got a more important request than that. If you're a listener and you drive a BMW or any rear-wheel driven car,
not all BMWs are rear-wheel driven anymore.
No, they're not. But
so some are four-wheel drive. Yeah, most.
So any rear-wheel driven car, please don't go out in the snow.
Mazda MX-5
It is you that causes the problems, because you get stuck and then no one can get you past you. I saw this about maybe 2 months ago, and it was literally a flurry of snow. Just like a little twinkling down of snow one morning, just for a few hours, and I was down over in Fife. Every time I got stuck in traffic, it took me like 3 hours to get home instead of an hour. It was because someone in a rear-wheel driven car had thought it was a great idea to drive their vehicle out. Even though I saw someone come out of their driveway, they struggled to get out, and they struggled all the way up the 20-meter slope, skidding around, their back end fishtailing, and they still thought it was a good idea to go out. Have some consideration.
I think this point was definitely proven as when I was delayed by about 5 hours in Glencoe in pretty bad weather, but I was in my four-wheel drive, I was happy, heated seats on, the lot, and my delay, a freaking BMW had come off the road, and the police had closed the road, and the thing that annoyed me the most, the people weren't even hurt, and the BMW wasn't still on the road, yet they still closed it, and that annoyed me a lot.
It wasn't on the road?
No, as far as I'm concerned, in this country, and in fact in any country in the world, if the people in the car are not seriously hurt, the police have a bulldozer and they just move it off the road and get the traffic flowing, because the bottom line is that you're delaying people's lives. And in fact, sometimes I think in some cases, if it's the person's fault, they bulldoze it with the person in it. And then deal with them after.
caveat, we don't condone personal injury unnecessarily. Okay, so that out the way.
So we're talking about snowy weather.
We are.
Also, if you have made any orders from our shop, please be patient because of the amount of snow and the country grinding to a halt. There might be a small delay. So when we say that something might be a few days late, we mean it might be a few days late because the post hasn't been picked up for almost a week.
Yeah, that was actually literally. It wasn't that we
went to the post office.
It's not very far from us, the post office, so we could always get to it. But the first day when this kind of snow got bad,
I think
they
it was
said,
Wednesday.
Yeah, they said, oh, we're not actually picking up today. And then the snow got worse. So I actually don't think they picked up post from our post office until the Monday after.
Yeah.
So like 4 or 5 days. So there is a massive backlog.
And you can think of the massive backlog throughout the whole country. But anyway, so if you did order from us, please be patient. And if you ordered during the bad weather and you haven't received your items within 2 weeks or something, then please let us know and we will sort it out for you.
Yeah, no, we definitely
will.
But
you just need to be a little bit patient because it's kind of out with our control.
It is. So, winner from 2 weeks ago, we asked you to post a picture which showed eating local. Eating in the great outdoors, eating local. We had some great entries, and the winner is Tom Bernard Y.
Well done.
So, congratulations. Great pick. You won a set of Smith Optics shooting glasses. So those will be on the way out to you. Just send us over your details. And we have another competition coming up for this show, which is to win a vintage Hornady reloading sign. I've lost count of the amount of these we've given away, and it's always one of our most popular entries. People seem to want the vintage tin signs. Have you thought about how we're going to put this competition up yet, Darryl?
I have not. I'm actually just trying to scroll through my emails right now because I just remembered that there was an amazing
You wanted to read one out? Okay, well, I'll work this out while you're trying to find the email. I know the one that you're talking about. We've actually had... I need to give you one bit of information before I give you another because it's just prompted me for another message we got yesterday. If you want to win the Hornady Vintage Reloading sign, then... we're going to make another picture competition because although we did it 2 weeks ago, we hadn't done it for quite a period of time. So the picture competition this week is going to be a picture that shows you or your best friend out in the great outdoors. Doesn't have to be a person, could be your dog. We love a dog picture. So your best friend in the great outdoors.
And it's not exclusive to people in the UK. Anyone can enter around the world. We haven't actually...
Tom's not from the UK.
Is he not?
No, I think he lives in Denmark.
Oh, okay, well, there we go. I was just going to say we've not had a winner from outside the UK for a while, but there you go. We just have. You know what? I'm going to flick through these emails for ages because I can't remember where
you can carry on looking because I'll tell another story. Just unfortunately, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but and I don't have my phone on me, but 2 days ago, we received a message on Facebook from a chap who had, I think he listens to the podcast, and he's certainly been watching the various films and stuff that we put out through our production company. And he took the time to message us just to say that by watching the films and listening to and reading the stuff that we've written, he had literally changed his career. He had completely changed his life from what he was doing before, and he was very proud because he'd just been accepted to one of the courses at Gamekeeping College, and I'm not quite sure how old he is, but he looks sort of in his mid-30s maybe.
Well, I think he'd had a career in the military
He had a career before. And that was him. He was changing his life. He'd been accepted to Gamekeeping College, which he was very, very pleased about, and that is the career choice that he was making. So that's fantastic to have been able to touch somebody's life like that, where they've made some choices off the back of all the conversations we have with all the great people that we interview and then the various films that we make.
I'm not going to be able to find this email. The reason for it is there's about 5 emails that are really nice along the lines of Byron just said we've had in the last 2 weeks, and I've had a lot of emails from I need to find it. It is in there
We'll
somewhere.
find it for the next show, but this person, I think the reason Darryl wanted to read it particularly is here was someone who wasn't involved in the hunting sort of fishing space, and they had taken it up and applied for their shotgun or firearms
They
license.
emailed us last week saying that due to the show they had applied for their
I think it was
shotgun certificates.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, which is absolutely amazing.
And they felt part of our community.
Welcome.
Yes.
Welcome to it.
You are very welcome. Everybody is.
Now, for any new listeners, because we get new listeners from the States nearly every single week, which is pretty cool. So hello to everyone in the United States and hello to everyone else that's joined us. we have some really cool guests coming on in the next few weeks. The show is every 2 weeks on a Thursday, typically. Sometimes there's some shows in between. In the next show, I believe we have Jim Shockey coming on.
We do. We're going to be seeing him this weekend in a couple of days. We're just about to pack up and go
We've
to
actually
Iwa.
got 2 podcasts with Jim, but I don't know how we're going to show them. But
one's going to be very short, so I think it'll probably be on the same show.
So this is going to be. We're not too sure how the next podcast is actually going to pan out, how long it's going to be, or anything, because it's going to be really quickly edited in between us going from Germany up to the North Pole, basically, within one day. So we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, hopefully it will be. Jim Shockey will more than likely be on the next show. Yes. If not, definitely the other one after that. And
then we've also got, but this will be in a couple of weeks' time when we get back from the Arctic, is Ben O'Brien's going to be on. And he is, he recently was in a film in Nepal through Yeti, which quite a few of you I'm sure have seen, and he has just recently started his own podcast called The Hunting Collective, which is rather excellent. So we've been speaking to him, and he is going to be coming on our podcast because he's a rather fascinating chap.
Yeah, so some really cool podcasts to come up with.
And there's going to be loads of surprises because we've got 3 days now in Nuremberg in Germany.
We don't know
we don't know who we're going to end up speaking to. It's like the European version of SHOT Show. That's about the best comparison I can give. It's the biggest trade fair in Europe.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic last year.
So in a matter of hours of this going out, we'll be on an airplane on our way. So make sure you check out our Instagram because that's probably where most of the action is going to be going on. There'll be a few pictures on our Facebook page, but it's Pace_Brothers, and we'll be doing some live videos and putting up pictures and loads of stuff on the Instagram, as much as we can anyway. We'll have a power bank with us because my phone lasts about 5 minutes. But the beauty of the mobile phones now in Europe is that our phone works in Germany at no extra cost.
Is it free now? Completely free?
Throughout the whole of Europe.
No £3 a day charge?
No £3 a day. So we can use all of our data, everything. And I've got 40 gigs of bad boy data to use. And I've not had a chance to use it yet. So.
Tremendous.
So we will be doing live videos and showing off.
And things. If you're there, if you are a listener who's listening to this on your way today...
Which we do know that we have a number of listeners that live in Germany who came to see us last year, who are coming to see us again this year because they've got car stickers to pick up. Come and say hello to us.
Look us up. Ping us a message on Instagram or Facebook. We'll try and check during the day periodically, and then we'll find a place to meet.
Best thing to do is message us on Instagram. We do check our other folders. Hey, do you know what's really cool? Me and Myron were like flicking through we're flicking through our Instagram the other day, and we were looking at Joe Rogan's thing. And
there was a reason why I was looking at Joe Rogan, though. It was because I'd written an article about it.
And it was like follow back, and Joe Rogan follows us. He's got like 3.1 million people on his...
and he doesn't follow that many people.
He follows 1,600 people, and he's got 3.1 million people follow him, and we're one of his followers, and we didn't even realise.
So that's our claim to fame this week.
Joe Rogan.
If you're listening, Joe Rogan, thank you very much. We love your stuff. Enjoyed writing the article about you and sharing and spreading the word of what you're about. So from that, well, you never know. Some point that is one of my goals for the next 12 months is to
either be on Joe's show or
to interview him.
I'd
love to have him on the show.
Because he's currently doing his comedy tour, I think, right now.
I think we'd have to be in his locale so we could actually record a proper quality podcast rather than like over Skype.
I don't think I've ever heard him do anything other than in his studio.
So it is our mission. We're going to try and make it happen. But we've got the next best thing.
Maybe with your help, people. Maybe if you message him and harass him enough and say, hey, Joe, get onto these guys. Because I'll tell you what, if he invited us to the show, we would fly straight out to California.
We'd do it.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
So, yes. But you're going to have to shelve that idea for the moment because we've got a new show for you this week. And we are bringing you an interview with Robbie Kroger. Now, I listened to a podcast with Robbie some months back, and I was like, this is a really interesting guy, really interesting story. And then life gets busy, didn't think anything else of it, about it. Then, totally out of the blue, I get an email from Robbie and explaining what he's trying to do, which you're going to hear about the Blood Origins project, which is the very first thing we talk about in this podcast. And then later on, you hear a little bit about his background. He has a fascinating job. We're going to get him back on the podcast to talk about that. In the wake of the BP oil spill, he's basically looking after the habitat and wildlife restoration. And so he explained to us what his project was about and basically wanted to have a conversation with us. And so I gave him a call back and said, actually, Robbie, I've heard your story and I was fascinated, and would you like to come on the podcast? He's like, yeah, man, that would be cool. So he came on the podcast, and it was a tremendous show. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking to Robbie, and you will, as listeners, be hearing from him again. As I said, probably not the hunting side, but just what his day-to-day job is just
we need to get into it more, because you hear more about it, but he heads up the framework, which was the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon, which we talk about there, but that task you must have not seen any horizon.
No, exactly. So I know that you're going to enjoy this. Do us a favor. After you finish listening to this podcast, please go leave us a review. It really does help, especially the more reviews we can get from different countries in the world. That really helps us in the rankings and helps us be found.
Yeah. It does. I think that is almost it, because we have to jump on a plane very soon.
We do, so we need to get this edited and out the door. Enjoy the show. Robbie, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. We've been speaking for the last couple of weeks, and I'm quite excited to have you on. It's strange how the world works, because I heard you on a podcast that we listen to a lot, the Journal of Mountain Hunting, quite a few months back, and then you contacted us, although none of that was connected in any way, and now you're on our show, so I'm very excited for our listeners to hear a little bit about your story and the project that you're working on right now. So I think the best place to start is going to be, we're going to talk about Blood Origins, because
which is a brilliant name, by the way.
Fantastic. And then we'll kind of work backwards, because what you actually do as a day-to-day job, I think, is absolutely fascinating, and I'd like to share that with our listeners as well. Now, what I am going to
absolutely.
What I am going to say now, though, just before you tell us about what Blood Origins is, for our listeners who will know that we are running a film festival at the Northern Shooting Show, we haven't announced any of the films yet, but I can tell them that one of your films for Blood Origins is going to be in the film festival. So that is the very, very first announcement of a film at the film festival. So fire away, Robbie. Wherever you want to start with this story, tell us about Blood Origins.
Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you to you two. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, Into the Wilderness, and the stuff that you guys are putting out there. When you start looking at the podcasting genre right now, I think the level has just been ramped up, and everybody is figuring out what we need to start talking about. And, I'm going to put the Into the Wilderness podcast up alongside, obviously, Adam Yonkey's Journal of Hunting podcast is a fantastic resource. But I'm going to put, Ben O'Brien with Yeti just dropped the Hunting Collective, which the first 4 episodes have been just outstanding. The Gritty Bowman is starting to tackle some really critical topics pertaining to the hunting community itself. There's just, again, I say that all to say I'm really humbled to be on with you guys. Love what you do, love your production company, love the videos that you are starting to produce. And again, I'm a complete unknown. The project is unknown. And, you just had Remy Warren on.
Yeah.
And you're now talking to me, which is just, blows my mind.
No, we're very well. First of all, thank you very much. I think we might have to use that for an endorsement of the show.
We might do, yeah.
But no, it's a pleasure to have you on. And from our point of view, we want the world, the hunting public and the non-hunting public, to hear great stories from great people who have a great mindset and an ethos and ethics that I think is going to carry the hunting community forward. And you name some of those guys. Remy had been on, Donnie Vincent's been on before, who was kind of a forerunner for a lot of the mindset that I think we should be following. And the stuff that you're working on now, and I'm starting to see and read, I think your project and name is going to be one that people become to recognize, and hopefully this podcast is going to help that.
Well, I again just appreciate it, and you brought up a place that we can start. As you said, man, Blood Origins, what a fantastic name, and we didn't actually start with the name Blood Origins. We started with the name In the Blood, and when I started talking and started pitching our pilots around, we are fortunate enough in Mississippi to have some very I call them originators in the hunting industry, the guys that are old school, like Cuz Strickland, like Will Primos, that if you look at them today and the time that they spend with young individuals, with kids, and really translating what hunting is meant to be, not what the industry is portraying today, but what hunting really means to them and what they want to leave as a legacy. I was fortunate enough to get my content in front of them, and they just gave me such valuable insight. And Will was the first one to say, he turned around when he watched my pilot, and he said, the first thing he said to me, he said, well, one, he said, who's shot this? Who is the production guy? And I said, I've got this guy down here in Gulfport. His name's Drew Seals from Lazy Lab Productions, and just a phenomenal young man who has an absolute eye for the camera, but also can translate a vision. And I had a vision of what I wanted. And then the next thing he said to me was, do you own it? Do you own In the Blood? And I said, oh, yeah, I do. We put the trademarks in. He goes, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Who else is in this space? And I said, well, there's these other two people. And he said, change now. And we hadn't even started. He said, change now, because it's going to stop you. It's going to reduce the amount of heartbreak that you have in 2 years' time when you are big and somebody comes and bumps into your space and is doing something completely against the ethos, as you mentioned, of what you're trying to do. And so we searched long and hard about what the next name should be, and we stumbled across Blood Origins, and it just fits so well with the impetus of the project, which is exactly exploring who we are, the origins of our blood, the origins of our heritage, the origins of why we hunt, and really capturing that story. And that's what Blood Origins is. It's a very simple concept. It's a storytelling documentary platform. And we shoot the stories and we shoot the episodes in a very intimate, connected way. We want somebody to turn on a Blood Origins episode and be riveted to the screen. We don't want you to turn away. We've introduced a little bit of B-roll. We don't introduce a lot of B-roll. And if you notice the way that we film it from the chest up, i.e., you're going to see very close shots of eyes and mouth and really feel connected to that individual story. And that's what's going to resonate. And that the resonating part of the project is simply twofold. One is to tell the non-hunting mainstream American audience, or the global audience to that fact, who we are as hunters. We are not just this trophy shot, grip and grin type of community. There's so much beyond that. There's so much beyond, sort of buried in our DNA about why we hunt and who we are as hunters. And that's what we're trying to capture. Secondly, it's letting that one person watch that one episode to say, wow, I used to hunt. Or wow, my dad used to take me hunting, but I don't hunt anymore. Or it's like me, dare I say, adult onset hunter. And we'll get into my story and why I'm an adult onset hunter. But I'm, as a buddy of mine says, I'm 39, but I'm in my 40th year right now. But I'm a nascent hunter. I've not experienced anything. Yet I want to embody what hunting is, and I want to showcase that to my two young boys. And I want to ensure that they turn into the hunters that I want them to become. And so it's that inspirational aspect of the project to say, if we just change that one individual to become a hunter, to harvest their own meat, to sustainably reap, what the creators put out there for us, then we've done our job, and I'll be completely happy, and I'll walk away from the project.
What I love about the kind of the short films is the intimate nature of it, and you're speaking to some of the people that you're speaking to are not necessarily the type of people that you might expect to have a story like that, and that's the beautiful thing about it, is that if you look back far enough, there probably is hunting, or there most definitely is hunting in your blood, and it's funny how that weaves its way through time and history, maybe skips generations and then comes back for some sort of reason, but it's in everyone's blood, and that intimate nature and feel of the way that the films have been shot. And I do have to compliment your cameraman who you mentioned, because it was one of the first things I noticed and Daryl noticed as a production company ourselves. We always got an eye for, okay, there's some nice camera work, there's somebody who knows what they're doing, and it does make a tremendous difference when you're trying to tell the stories that you're trying to tell.
Absolutely, and you nailed it. It's in everyone's blood. And I'll take it one step further and say, and this is the tagline to the project, is everyone has a story. And what we're figuring out is, and this is what's the sort of beautiful part of this project, is that the unknown stories are actually coming across and being picked up probably more than the known stories. So Cuz Strickland, right? Cuz Strickland is very well known in the Southeast for who he is. He's just an amazing person. His episode was amazing. If you haven't watched it, do yourself a favor. Episode 3, he just goes into why he is who he is, and he's an amazing guy. But that we followed his episode with a lady called Joanna Dart.
Mm-hmm. That was the first one I watched. First one I watched was that one.
Korean female, 25 years old, has been hunting for 2 years, was not raised. Her story is incredible, right? Adopted at 5 from South Korea to a single mother. The mother didn't hunt. She somehow got her way into a program and got taught to hunt. And it sort of buried itself in her blood, or awakened something that was inside of her DNA. And at the time of us filming, she was the Learn to Hunt coordinator for the state of Ohio. So she had literally taken this thing that was awakened in her 2 years prior and had turned it into who she was as a person in a career. Well, now she's actually just got hired as the R3 coordinator for the National Wild Turkey Federation for the entire state of Ohio.
Tremendous.
So it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Tremendous. Absolutely crazy.
What a great conservation tie-in as well. I mean, the story of the turkey conservation in North America is one of the great conservation stories. In fact, it's one that we haven't talked about. We were not going to talk about it today, but we've not talked about it on this podcast, but I must make a note to bring it up in the future.
Well, I have the guy. When you're ready to talk about it, I have the guy.
Oh, brilliant.
So it's, and that's to us is, I feel, super privileged when you stand behind that camera and listen to these people's stories that, they've just opened up their hearts to you, sort of a no-namer. We just reached out of the blue saying, hey, here's our project. This is what we're trying to do. Do you mind us telling your story? And then they intimately open up in front of you just like that. Is just incredible. So humbling.
Yeah.
Incredible.
When I saw the name of the project and started to read a little bit about it and hear you speak about it, it resonated really strongly with us, because one of the little slogans that we started putting on T-shirts 2 years ago to help support the podcast with people buying it was "Embrace Your DNA," which is a different way
almost
of saying what you're
thing,
saying. Yeah.
No, that you're absolutely right. It's who we are, right? It's just buried inside of us, and from your guys' beginnings in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and your family's beginnings to where you are today. Similar to my story of where I was, where my heritage came from, and where we are today, and the culture and the industry, the position of the culture in the industry today. We have a massive job on our hands, and hopefully the project is just is one pellet in that shotgun shell that we need to change the tide, essentially.
Yeah. I think that we do. I think everybody involved in it now has a responsibility to try and do something that is going to help reshape how hunting is viewed, and a project like yours is exactly the kind of thing which, in a greater or lesser extent, is going to make a difference. We might not realize who we touch that it makes a difference to. You might not realize who you touch it makes a difference to, but it definitely will. Now, before I get to your background, because that's what we want to get to next, how do people watch this, and what is the format? What's the future going to look like, if you can answer that, for Blood Origins as a project and a sort of a TV series?
So I don't know if we'll ever go into the TV landscape. Right now, we're just working on a digital platform. We drop all of our episodes and stories through Facebook, and you can find us at Blood Origins. We're at Blood Origins across all of our platforms,
Great.
All of the digital platforms. So YouTube, Blood Origins on YouTube, Blood Origins on Instagram, at Blood Origins on Facebook. And so we're just a digital platform right now. Again, we're very, very young. We dropped the first episode in September, but the momentum, I can feel it already. Like, it's starting to build tremendously. Again, just being on a podcast like yours, I have to pinch myself. But it's we don't know where it'll go. We've got some ideas from a content streaming perspective. One of the things that we probably may talk about a little later is that we just came back from essentially my first, and this is where I think there's a very nice tie into the project, given who I am as a hunter, because I'm exploring, again, who I am as a hunter and wanting to learn so I become as good a hunter as I possibly can be for my boys. And so we just came back from a Barbary sheep hunt in New Mexico. That was my first Western hunt ever, and was really my first test. And we filmed the entire thing.
Oh, amazing.
And we're couching it completely differently. We're trying to think outside the box to what a hunting film should be, and we're going to call them journeys.
Yep.
And it's going to be all about the journey in, the journey out. What we experienced on the hunt, and we were listening to a podcast on the way home, actually, with Aaron Hitchens on the Kafaracast, and Aaron was like, the brutal weather, the misses, the chances not taken, all of that wraps in to make it a better story. And what we experienced, you couldn't have written a better story the way it actually turned out. So stay tuned for that. That's what's coming. So there's plenty of stuff coming. We've got a lot of episodes in the bank. We're about to film a couple of we've got a lot of episodes lined up as well. So we've got a lot of good content coming. And again, what we like about it is that you never know what's going to hit next, right? Are you going to see a female next? Are you going to see an African-American next? Are you going to see a veteran next? Are you going to see a very well-known hunting icon next? You just don't know what's going to come, and that's what we like about it. Oh,
that is exciting. I'm quite excited to see what your output's going to be from that hunt, because obviously we're seeing the Blood Origins, which is quite a set format and fairly short. But you're absolutely right what you say. The pulling of the trigger is such a tiny part, and it is 100% the journey that you take, and that forms your reason for being there. Some of our listeners will remember a podcast we did some months back, I guess October, November last year, which was I was in Nepal filming a hunt, which I'm just finishing editing right now, and that is so much. We did some fantastic hunting there, but 95% of it is about the culture and just being in awe of the landscape that you're in. It is about the story, but not really about the hunt.
That's only happened in fairly recent time. Again, there's been a swing about showing less of the hunt and more about everything that goes on, because there was a period of time that me and Byron saw ourselves that programs would not show, they wouldn't be produced unless there was a kill shot in it. The cameramen would not be paid unless there was a kill shot in it. And it's entirely their fault for part of the mess that we're in today because of programs like that, where they will only show the kill shot, and
that was an insistence on it.
It was an insistence of it, and they would slow it down, and also it's a weird obsession with some people that like to watch the kill shot over and over again, because we see it on YouTube stats. If you put up a film with a kill shot in it, people do rewatch it over and over again, which to an extent is slightly strange.
Yeah, I think that this is something that the hunting industry has to tackle head on, and I've noticed it myself. So, and you bring up a really interesting point, and I wrote it actually in a little Insta story. John Dudley even brought it up on the Hunting Collective. He said it's a very weird thing our industry is in. We don't want to make it about killing, yet we do. And it was so poignant the way he said that, because when you post, and you guys know this better than anybody, when you post something on Instagram that is quasi grip and grin, your likes and impressions are through the roof. Yet you post this picture of you leaving this amazing landscape with the sun setting, and it's this sort of experiential type picture. You don't get half the impressions and half the views, and unfortunately the connectivity between the impressions and reach and likes and follows tied to marketing and brands and the industry itself, that connectivity, if nobody looks at that connection and figures out a way to rework it, then we're going to be stuck, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, just talking about your reach and likes, I thought
you were going to do that. Yeah.
I've just scrolled through our Instagram, and there's a picture here of a stag coming off the hill. Don't get me wrong, I took it, but it is a fantastic picture.
If he does say so.
It was an amazing picture.
If I do say so myself, yeah. But in terms of what it captures, it's amazing. And if you look at the engagement and the likes and that, over 1,000 people have liked it. The engagement is huge on it. And then I put up a picture the following day of some cultural stuff in Nepal, 100 people. Yeah, like the difference is night and day between.
We see it a lot with.
You put a gun in a picture.
Yeah, that's just what I'm saying. Just a gun for whatever reason. I used to review a lot of guns, so we have a lot of stock photos of guns, and you get huge engagement, which is fine. But then really, really important stuff where you put up another like a fantastic picture, which is telling the story of some form of conservation / hunting initiative. And sometimes it just doesn't have the pull. And
I do blame the algorithms partly on social media for that happening. But on the other hand, I don't understand why people evidently follow you, yet they're extraordinarily picky on what they engage with and what they like on social media.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen it changing, though, Robbie, in the last couple of years? Have you seen it shifting in the right direction from where you are? Again, we are going to get into your background, but you're over in the States, so you have a slightly different view of it compared to us in the UK, Europe.
Sure. I think that the tide is changing. I'm very optimistic that the tide is changing. You just look at the types of content that the big influencers are putting out there, right? You look at the guys that are the lead horses in our industry, the John Dudleys, the Adam Greentrees, the Cam Haines, the Stephen Ranellas, the Remy Warrens, and just scroll through their feed and see what they're posting. Those guys are posting exactly what the industry needs right now. It's all about respect. It's all about the experience. It's all about relationships. It's all about, this is who I am as a hunter. It's not. There's a couple of grip and grins in there, and Ben O'Brien has really started a very good debate and conversation about that whole trophy shot grip and grin. And I truly think that this is just my own hypothesis here, but we live right now in, I guess, a millennial culture of social media. And the millennial culture of especially hunters in the social media space is they're so young that the grip and grin, the gunshot that you mentioned, all those things, that's what they like. If you gave it, and this is the problem, if we give it another 10 years, say, for that bubble of millennials to move into the next space in their lifespans, which is now they're married, now they have kids, now they're starting to think a little differently as hunters. Well, I think that will completely shift the landscape of what they're actually engaging with online. The problem, though, is it's going to take 10 years. And what happens in that 10-year span, right? Are we still the hunters that we are here in 10 years? I hope we are. I hope that we have strengthened. I hope that we have built a coalition about who we are and really have infused back into the generations beneath us and our own generations to become hunters, that we're not, in America, we're now 11 million strong, so 4% of the population. And hopefully in 10 years' time, we're not, 5 million strong and 2% of the population. Hopefully we've held steady and gained ground maybe. But to me, that's my own little internal hypothesis, is that we have the social media following that is a very young crowd that's tied to social media, and we just need them, just like you and me. We've evolved as hunters as we've gotten older, and as we've gained responsibilities, and we need that crowd to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's a fair point, actually. You forget, or I forget. We've both hunted since I could walk, basically. I'd be following our dad wherever it was, going to shoot rabbits. And you evolve, not just as a hunter, but you evolve as a person. The stuff that you did, there'll be things that you did outward of the sort of hunting circles, just in your life that you did as a kid and in your very early teens, which you would never do now, because you grow up, you learn, you realize you've done some stupid things and made mistakes, and that's just life. So you're right when you say that. Is that there will be this online generation, which is from a certain time, because when I was 12 years old, there was no Facebook.
there was no
there
internet.
was nothing. We didn't. I don't actually know if we even had dial-up in the house. There was certainly no mobile phones or anything like that. It makes me sound very old. I'm only 30, but it just shows you how quickly that all came along.
I only got a mobile phone when I went to high school, and I'm only 27.
Yeah.
26, 27. Yeah.
So it's that's an insight I hadn't thought of before, Robbie, but you probably are quite right there. There's certainly going to be an element at play where that generation that is very absorbed in it and very involved in it and is engaging on these platforms needs to evolve as people, just as you get older, and as hunters if you're a hunter.
So maybe this is a good segue into sort of my background, so it sort of gives you an idea of who I am today as a hunter. As you can tell, I'm from South Africa. Well, maybe you can't tell that I'm from South Africa.
We certainly can.
So I'm from South Africa, sort of raised in a town called Johannesburg, 8.5 million people. No real opportunity to hunt at all. And really, why would I even be thinking about or talking about hunting, being raised in a town like that? Well, my family is just sort of steeped in hunting tradition. Hunting heritage is it runs in my blood. My grandfather, his name was Leo Kroger. My oldest son is named after him. He was born in a town called Khabarovsk, which is in Siberia, in Russia, in 1912. And he sort of went through it all. He went through 2 world wars, multiple revolutions in China. And he sort of at a point in his life was a hunter-gatherer by necessity. He lived in Manchuria, northern China. He sort of waxed and waned between northern China and Russia and Siberia. Hunted for the pot, went pheasant hunting in Tibet. You name it, this man did it.
What a life.
It was old school hunting. What a life, right? And he told me, well, he didn't actually tell me. I read it in a story of his. He got to experience 2 hunting paradises that this world had to offer. The Manchurian steppe, as well as the Siberian taiga. And in the 40s, he immigrated back to Germany. He was raised by a Russian mother and a German father. German father died when he was 1 year old. And again, I've got the beautiful thing about my grandfather was he was a storyteller. And I think that's the embodiment of what Blood Origins is that he wrote down all of his stories, all of his adventures around the world, from fishing and hunting. And I've got a number of stories of him, of his from that time, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, in northern China, in northern Germany. Um, one of the funniest stories is that he obviously went through a lot of hard times. He just and experienced a lot of very, very cold winters. And something clicked in the 40s when he got married. He had 2 kids. My father and my aunt were born in northern China. He said, I'm done. I am done with the cold. Let me find a place that I can get out of the cold. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. And he got offered a job in then Lorenzo Marques, Mozambique. And he said, that's it. I'm out. I'm going to live the rest of my days in a summer paradise, a hunting paradise, and I won't ever have to deal with wars or anything like that, because that literally was a constant in his life. And so he, again, just think about this, right? In the 50s, he stuck his family on a boat, and 3 months later, they arrived in Lorenzo Marques, Mozambique. And so he lived the heyday of Africa. He lived the heyday of African hunting for a good 20 years. My father was a teenage boy in those days, and he was the camp boy. And they would go off into the hinterland in the bush for 3 weeks at a time. My grandfather was a professional hunter for the first hunting concession in Mozambique, run by a guy called Werner von Aldensleben, called Safarilandia. One of the PHs that you may be familiar with that worked for Safarilandia is a guy called Harry Manners. Yep. You can still buy Harry Manners' book through Safari Press. And my grandfather hunted with the names in hunting. He hunted with Fred Bear when Fred Bear was in Mozambique. He hunted with Robert Ruark 3 or 4 times. I've got an inscribed book by my grandfather of The Old Man and the Boy. If you've never read The Old Man and the Boy by Robert Ruark, do yourself a favor. It's an amazing book about southeastern hunting. But what's amazing to me is that my grandfather actually wrote in the front of that book, and at the end of the letter, he said, P.S., when you hear about Ruark's camp, that's where Bob, and he called him Bob came and hunted with us 3 times, and he wrote the honey badger on the porch of one of our hunting camps.
Oh, amazing. What a great history.
And just amazing history, amazing heritage. And then revolution hit in Mozambique in 74.
Yep.
Sad. All guns were taken away, just like happened in Zimbabwe. And all hunting was removed. Literally, the landscape was raped of resources and conflict. I was born in 78 and raised in South Africa, and essentially all of the opportunities that were provided to my father as a teenage boy and my grandfather were denied to me. I'll make a quick tangent. My father was here about 3 months ago, and we started getting into some of his old storytelling. And he told me that as a camp boy, and this is a teenager, 12, 13 years old, his job every morning was to walk out of camp with one of the camp boys and find a herd of impala. And he would shoot an impala. They would drag it back to camp, and they would gut it, and they would take the fresh liver out of that impala every morning. And his job was to slice the liver and grill it
for breakfast
with onions and garlic, and that was the camp breakfast every morning.
That's not a bad job to have.
But think about it. As a 13-year-old boy living that lifestyle, come on.
And he probably did it with a 2.2 Hornet, which was all the rage back then.
Something, right? Yeah. Just amazing. And so, unfortunately, everything that was, I didn't get. I was raised in an urban environment. South Africa doesn't have any public hunting grounds. South Africa doesn't have any public licenses. To even own a weapon in South Africa then was difficult. Now is extremely difficult. And so it's just, and it's funny when I think about it, and especially this project is making me think about it. I was like, well, why didn't my father or my grandfather talk to me about hunting? Why didn't they tell me about all the stories? I literally just got the stories that were written on a piece of paper and the trophies that were on the wall. I didn't get to sit down, and I just can pinch myself today and just that I could have just sat down with my grandfather night after night after night and just sat there and listened to him. But we didn't. And the reason why was that I think that he had resigned himself to the fact that time, that opportunity was gone. And why put me through what was? versus what is, and what is was that there was nothing available to me. And so I went to school in South Africa, like every boy in Africa, every boy in South Africa wants to be a game ranger, right? We want to be policemen, we want to be firemen, we want to be lawyers, just like any other kid around the world. But in South Africa and Africa specifically, you want to be a game ranger. You want to be that guy that takes people and shows them lions and shows them elephants and whatnot. And so
it's the hero role, being a game ranger there, isn't it?
Exactly. You're that cool guy, right? Driving the Land Rover around. And I guess that's sort of the if you think there's two things buried inside me, buried in my blood. One is obviously this hunting heritage that's buried inside me, but there's also this conservation restoration ethic buried inside me. And so I studied environmental conservation biology at school. I trained to be a wetland ecologist. That's what I do. That's sort of my bread and butter of my career. And I'll be a little tangential here and explain, I think, that's why I have that conservation restoration bent to me, or why I do have this conservation restoration bent to me. So we've talked about my father's side of the family in terms of hunting heritage. My grandmother, who married Leo, her side of the family actually were the first foresters of the Sachsenwald in northern Germany.
Oh, amazing.
So these guys were the first conservationists working for the German baron at the time, looking after his resource. So the forests at the time were not public, they were owned by the princes. And so these guys were in charge of essentially taking care of the resource, and the resource being the timber, the resource being the animals. And so these guys' jobs they were hunters as well. So they needed to hunt and provide food for the prince and his staff and all of his guests. And so I have this sort of, I believe, these foresters and who they were and the ethic of conservation buried in my blood too. And so that's why I am who I am today. And that I told you I'm a wetland ecologist. I was fortunate enough to work in Kruger National Park as a master's student for 6 to 9 months, and then was very, very fortunate to get an opportunity to come to the States to do a PhD. And so my PhD work was tied with essentially infusing wetland features into agricultural landscapes so that we made sure that the ag that we know that we need to feed a burgeoning global population was efficiently increasing, as well as improving the environmental impact and footprint of that agriculture. And so I did that for a couple of years. I was a professor at Mississippi State in the Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture Department. And in 2010, the BP, actually 2010, the BP oil spill happened, and I think I'm messing up that date.
I can't remember the exact date. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was quite a few years back now.
Yeah, so the oil spill happened, and I was fortunate enough, as everybody knows, it's all about who you know in this world, and I'd met the right people, and they were standing up a federal entity that was going to handle the restoration of this oil spill from Texas to Florida, called the Restore Council. And they hired an executive director, they hired a chief financial officer, and an assistant executive director. And then they said, we need to hire a chief scientist. And again, just humbled beyond belief in that the guys turned to me and they said, we want you to be the chief scientist of the federal council. And so I stood up the restoration framework from Texas to Florida about how we handle the restoration process. And I met the people that was just operating at a completely different level about what I had done. And don't get me wrong, the work that I was doing was absolutely meaningful, but now I was at a level that was career defining for a scientist.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that oil spill, I mean, that was a disaster. Everyone knows how big it was, but in terms of what it did to the environment, it was pretty massive. I don't think it was actually reported quite as big in this country as it probably was in the States.
Absolutely massive. And, the biggest, some would argue, but I would argue that it was the biggest ecological disaster the planet has seen thus far. And so, as a result, we have the largest ecological restoration project that the planet has ever seen. And so it's really important. And there's a lot of eyes looking at you, right, to say, you guys better do a really good job. And so we made sure that we stood up a framework that was accountable, that was transparent, and that was meaningful to the resource that got impacted as associated with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So I did that for about 9 months, and was about to transition back to Mississippi State back to professor that Mississippi State had actually loaned me out. And the state of Mississippi, a small consulting company, approached me and said, what you've done for the Gulf, we want you to do that specifically for the state. And so, again, fortunate enough, got offered a job that was career defining, and now every day I work in consultation with the state to help put and support implementation of restoration on the ground in Mississippi. And so, as I said, before we even got on here, in about an hour, I've got about a 2-hour discussion that's going to range from marine mammal strandings to sea turtle telemetry to how do we effectively put oysters back back on the ground.
Wow, incredible! I'd love to do an entire show actually just on your work within that, because I think that would be
absolutely incredible. And actually, just talking about what you did after the Deepwater Horizon incident to restore, because you set up the framework, and I'm assuming the work is still going on now, is it?
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know this, but the payout for BP is over the next 15 years.
Okay.
So we've got at least 20 more years of restoration hitting the ground in front of us. And it's amazing. Look, don't get me wrong. This is the opportunity that's in front of us, right? A lot of people have said out of catastrophe has come opportunity. And that's exactly what has happened, in that you've got, even across the Gulf, not just Mississippi, but Mississippi, we're putting in, restoration projects that only, in your wildest dreams you could have put in the ground because of the amount of money that's available. In Louisiana, for example, they're starting to do things like massive river diversion. So a river diversion of the Mississippi River to start pushing sediment back into wetlands that are subsiding because of sea level rise and because of starvation of a lack of sediment being introduced into the system. Now they're altering that and putting it back in. And that's a nearly $1 billion or $1.3 billion project.
Yeah, it's hard to find money for these things.
It kind of shows you, though, if obviously BP being an absolute giant, along with many other large corporations, it shows you that they can still survive, bounce back, and pump all that money in, and have that disaster and still be around. It kind of shows you maybe these big companies probably should have had an obligation to be spending large amounts of money doing these things anyway.
It's pretty amazing. You nailed it.
Yeah.
So that's just a short. That I know it wasn't very short, but there's a lot behind me.
Yeah.
And, but I guess to put a fine point on it, that's why we wanted to start the Blood Origins Project, is that there are elements to who we are as hunters, the story behind who we are. That story for me is both conservation, restoration of my background, as well as who I am today and what I do, plus the hunting heritage part of who I was, of who my family was, and sort of marrying those two together. And I've got 2 very young boys, 6 and 4, and it is imperative to me that they become hunters that I want them to become.
Because I guess you feel like if they don't have the opportunity to embody it and embrace it as they feel fit, as they grow older, then there will be a little part of them that will forever be missing.
Exactly. I don't want to be in a position when they're 18 and they say, Dad, why didn't you do this with us? Or I just want them to say, well, Dad, you gave it a good go. We just don't want to be hunters.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Also
that's going to be okay with me. Yeah, exactly.
But you have to put the opportunities there and lay the sort of the groundwork of our own histories. And each one of us has a different history. Like we said at the very start of this podcast, which if you go back far enough, hunting will have been part of it, whether we like it or not. But it is important, and so often these stories are lost that it really pains me if I think back when I was younger, and you don't think about these things. A bit like you were saying earlier about you didn't quite understand why didn't talk every evening with your grandfather about all the hunting stories, and it might be a slightly different reason why he didn't have those conversations. But even as a young person, as you're growing up, you don't want to really sit. I mean, I kind of did to some extent, but when you're very young, you don't want to sit and listen to old stories from old people. You just don't. And no one does. But as you get older, you will. And we do have a lot of young people who listen to this podcast as well. And I can promise you one thing: if you don't take the time to listen to those great stories and get it out of whoever that might be, it might not be a relative, it might just be an older person that who has great hunting related or not hunting related stories. If you don't take the time to have the conversations with them, eventually it's too late, and you will forever regret it.
No, you couldn't have said it better. It is. I probably was the same way. If he even offered the opportunity, I don't remember, right? And I just was like, I'll go play with my BMX.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So with your granddad being in obviously northern China, in China, was he writing in English? Because he wouldn't have been a native English speaker.
No, he wasn't. He was he was just multilingual, right? He spoke Chinese, he spoke Mandarin, he spoke German, he spoke Russian, and then he obviously spoke Portuguese when he was in Mozambique, having to learn Portuguese. Didn't know Portuguese and moved his entire family into a Portuguese-speaking colony. He wrote all these stories when he was in his 60s and 70s. I think post-revolution, somebody must have sparked an interest in him to say, man, you've done so much. You need to start capturing all these stories. And thankfully he did. And he got a book published with Safari Press called My Last Kambaku. It only ran 1,000 prints. And it's a very rare book to find nowadays. It was actually funny. I'll give you a tangential story. I was at the Dallas Safari Club earlier this year, and I ran across a Safari Press booth. And there's this old bookshelf in the background. And I was like, hey, let me just go have a look to see if my grandfather's book's on this bookshelf, because it's all full of old books. And lo and behold, there was my grandfather's book. I pulled it out. I couldn't believe it. I've got a copy, but I'd love to have more copies. And pulled out the book. And I turned to the guy that was there and I said, man, I'm his grandson. And he goes, you're Leo Kroger's grandson? I said, yes, sir. And he goes, I was the one who negotiated the book with him. And my grandfather's been dead since 2003. So I was like, oh my gosh, can you tell me a little bit more about it? And he's like, yeah, he even tried to convince us that we needed to publish a fishing book. Now, this is the Safari Press, right? Yeah. And gives you an idea of who my grandfather was. And he said, yeah, he even told us he would pay us to publish a fishing book. So this is the kind of guy that, would have a dinner party over to his house of like American ambassadors, Spanish ambassadors in Mozambique. And when he was ready to go to bed, he would get up off the table, he would wind the clock, and everybody knew, hey, he was going to bed, and you could either stay or you could go. It's up to you.
Really? I love that.
Is it the kind of I don't even know. I don't know much about remaking books, but I'm assuming you can take books to be reprinted somewhere.
Yeah, I think so. I'll finish the story by saying, and then I turned to the lady who was taking orders, and I said, "Hey, could I get a discount for the book since I'm the grandson?" Mm. And there was this other little lady standing next to her. She goes, oh, yeah, sure, you can get the discount. And she introduced herself, and she was the editor-in-chief of Safari Press. And she goes, I was actually the editor-in-chief of that book. And again, I was like, whoa, can you tell me a little bit about him? And she goes, well, how would I describe Leo? And I said, eccentric. And she was like, yes, and charming. And she goes, what I'll do is they keep these, they call them dockets of all the correspondence that they had with each of the authors to just make sure that, the author doesn't pull a fast one and say, oh, I told you to do this and you actually did the other thing, and they can pull out a correspondence and no, you actually told us to do that. Well, it turns out that she went back to the Safari Press dungeon, they call it, and she found the docket of her correspondence with my grandfather.
That's incredible.
And so we're going to get it. But yeah, I'm going to try and explore a little bit with her, because the stories are, they range from sort of the gun dogs in his life, to pheasant hunting in China, where these guys, followed a utopian fable of this fabled pheasant hunting ground in this way off landscape in China. There was not a pheasant to be found. They barged into this random Chinese house, which, as I understand it, based on the story, that if you were a foreigner in China at the time, you could go into anybody's house and they would welcome you. They dropped all their food on the table. They dropped 3 bottles of vodka, bottles of cognac. This is Christmas Eve. They drank their way into the night. The owner of the house finally came home. The husband finally came home, put him on a wagon, a horse-drawn wagon, took him back to the trade station. These guys were so drunk that they started trying to shoot the moon out of the sky and started yelling at, laughing hysterically at one another about how bad a shot they were because the moon wouldn't refuse to fall out of the sky. To a story about duck hunting in Mozambique, where they took a bunch of sailors that had just come into port up to a beautiful swamp to duck hunt. They got interacting with the local villagers and the local brew that the villagers had procured for that day. And on the way home, on the boat ride on the way home, they got upended by a hippopotamus in the river and had to salvage all their gear. Just, crazy stories. Not just hunting, just crazy stories from the 20s through the 90s.
Well, Robbie, if that book ever does get reprinted, put me on the list for the reprint.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think I'll be able to afford the limited 1,000 copies, but I'll definitely buy a reprint. I love stories like that.
No, it's incredible.
It's
incredible. It's
just while I'm mindful of it, because I think you would really appreciate it when you're talking about Mozambique during that time, which was, for anyone who doesn't know the history of the revolution there, it was just terrible for everyone who lived there. What an amazing, amazing country it was pre-revolution, how screwed up it got after. But there's a book written called The Last Ivory Hunter. Have you read it, Robbie?
I don't believe I have.
Okay, well, it's The Last Ivory Hunter. It's a whole heap of interviews that Capstick did with a guy called Wally Johnston. So the book is 90% Wally Johnston, word for word what he said, and Capstick did the interviews. And he was essentially probably one of the last true ivory hunters, going from Mozambique through into northern Rhodesia, as it was then, Zambia now, and he basically traversed the entire continent. And the very end of that book, which is an incredibly sad part of it, takes part during that revolution. He actually couldn't go home. They wouldn't let him back over the border. He had been hunting in a different country, and they wouldn't let him back in. And many, many years later, he went back in, and all his stuff was gone because many years had passed. But you've given us little snippets of your grandfather's past. So I know that you would definitely appreciate the stories of Wally Johnson. There's this one section in there where his pickup truck gets stuck somewhere out in the bush because the prop shaft snapped, and to show you the type of man he was. And I think that that period of time just seemed to be men like this, when they're men and women. So I should correct myself. Would just seem to be built tough, because he manufactured a prop shaft out of rope and some sticks, essentially, that he managed to fashion out of the bush, while his friend who he was with walked 3 days back to town because they didn't know whether he would be able to get it out, and eventually they met. But that's in that book, and I know that you would appreciate it. And for our listeners, The Last Ivory Hunter is a tremendous book from that period of time.
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on is, with my grandfather's stories, with those stories is, and you guys are absolutely, nailing it in terms of the stuff that you guys are producing is I think that the element of storytelling that is, again, a part of who we are as hunters it's not dead, but it's definitely missing, I think, in our landscape, in our hunting industry landscape, because that's just a whole part of who we are. When people think about the hunt, as you mentioned, you don't think about the 2 seconds that it took to shoot the animal. What you remember is the stories, and you remember, sitting around the fire, talking about the experience, talking about that journey, and it's that storytelling aspect that I think we've moved away from. But again, as I said, I think the tide is changing, that we're slowly starting to re-embrace that storytelling aspect of who we are.
Yeah, and the reason I think it's so important is that without the storytelling, it is very, very difficult for someone who knows nothing, who might have lived their entire life in a city and know nothing of the greater world outside the suburban element of it, to understand what's going on and why you do it. How can you expect them to if you haven't actually told a proper story? So yeah, storytelling, I hope it is coming back. I see it in the written word. You might have seen the Modern Huntsman, the guys there, we had them on the podcast. I think in terms of written press, that was the start of the written press changing the way that stories are told.
And people are loving it. I mean, we are selling copies every single day.
Yeah,
we flying out of our shop
for them here. And
that's incredible.
If you don't have a copy of it, Robbie, get yourself one.
Not from us, because there's no point.
But get it from them directly in the States.
Yeah.
Because when you read that, they call it a magazine. It's more of a book at the moment. I think it's been published twice a year. You're reading stories, and a lot of the stories in there, written by hunters and ecologists and whoever else is in there, but just people fascinated with the great outdoors. A lot of those stories, there's no killing in it, because they are great stories that happened while they might happen to have been hunting. But the what made it fascinating was this particular story, and the gun might have not even been shouldered, but it doesn't detract anything from it. It is a fantastic piece of writing from start to. I haven't quite finished it yet, so I'm sure it's going to be from start to finish, but the 50% that I've read, fantastic what I've read so far, and you would definitely appreciate it because storytelling's at the core of it.
Well, I think that, again, I'll even point to, Adam's summer, his first edition of the Journal of Hunting, Mountain Hunting, his first print edition did the same thing, right?
We're in that, I think.
I think you are.
Yeah, I haven't got a copy yet. I need to speak to him, but
you need to get on to him. He's a very, very busy man. I know. But you talk. There's a story in there about Adam's New Zealand hunt where he chose not to harvest the animal because that wasn't what he was after. Or take that animal, sorry, that wasn't what he was there for, but it was a 4,000 word piece all about the experience. And again, that's when you take that city dweller that's looking at our Instagram feed or looking at our Facebook feed, and the only thing they see is that trophy shot, then they automatically assume, and they have to, because that's all they get, that's who we are as the hunter. And I think, one of the things that you'll start seeing from us in these journeys is that we're going to tell the truth about what goes into this hunt, and that you may not even see the trigger being pulled. You may not even see the kill shot. And the reason being is that to us, it is the finality of the purpose of the hunt. Don't get me wrong. That's the finality of who we are as hunters. But we do it for so many other reasons that are often lost. And so we're gonna strive to really capture that idea that a hunt to be successful means you have killed.
Robbie, I want to wrap this up now because I know that you need to get away, but what I definitely want to, if you've got it to hand, what I would like to hear from you for our listeners is, I've heard you read, I think it's a paragraph from a letter written by your grandfather, or I can't quite remember now. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's quite a touching letter about you becoming a hunter.
I do know what you're talking about, but I do not have it with me right now. But if you would hold on 2 seconds,
we can do that.
You may have to pause it.
No, that's okay. The power of editing, we can do it.
All right. So I've got a couple of things, obviously, that my grandfather left me. One is the book itself, and I'll give you a couple of excerpts out of these things. In the book that we've been talking about, it's called My Last Kambaku. Kambaku is sort of Shangaan, as the African dialect in Mozambique for elephant. And he inscribed in the book this to Robbie. And this is funny. This is probably 98 when he did this for me. To Robbie, the future environmentalist who will make it good again, notwithstanding the slaughter by his dedushka. Dedushka's grandfather in Russian. And it's sort of poignant that he actually wrote it the way he did, right? To who I am today. And I think that at the time when he wrote that, he's obviously retrospectively looking back at what was. It's like, hey man, could I have done something a little differently?
But many of those great hunters. Sorry to interrupt you, Robbie, but many of those great hunters at the time, that's when they reflect back on it. They became the great conservationists. Came at the end of their time of many years of basically finding their way as hunters. There's lots of great examples of that. So I suppose your grandfather wasn't unique in a way, but he was doing the same thing that a lot of those great names that we associate with the great hunter conservationists of the past did, which was very much reflect on what they'd done in the decades that had come before.
So I'll read you two more things. The one is what sort of started the project, which is the letter that he typewritten to me in 1992. It's on rice paper. You've seen it in the first Blood Origins episode. And he opens it by saying, "Dear Robbie, it was indeed a surprise to hear that you're keen to become a hunter. It must be, quote unquote, in the blood. I'm glad that you have broached the subject yourself. Otherwise, I might have been accused of leading you astray," sort of his comical ways about him. But then that Robert Ruark book that I was talking about, he inscribed this in 1993 to me. And I think this sort of sums up who he was and what he really wanted from, I guess, I'm going to struggle with this a little bit, but essentially what he wanted his legacy, his heritage to become. And I think he was seeing at the time a very, very bleak future, for his love, his absolute passion for hunting and the outdoors, because he couldn't see it. He couldn't see the opportunities that he had. And those were gone essentially for his grandson, who was me and my potential kids. And so this was the letter that he wrote. He said, "Dear Robert," and this is him reading the stories of Ruark, "I read these stories more than 30 years ago and hoped that I would also have a grandson to whom I could show my beloved bush, its incredible abundance of wildlife, and teach the boy the things I knew. Still, this would have been possible if the political upheavals had not torn us apart and destroyed the Mozambique I knew." And this is the poignant statement here. "One does not bemoan what could have been, but does one's best with what there is. I'm looking forward to our first safari and hope that we shall still have many opportunities of hunting together." That safari never happened. I never got to hunt with my grandfather. I killed a pigeon or two or dove with him, but I never really ever got to hunt with him. And now I live in America. I live in Mississippi with two young boys. And the end of that letter in 92, he, I might get a little emotional here, but he said, "Keep this letter in your files. The time might come when you would be able to read it to your grandsons and tell them stories about their great-great-grandfather. Hals Bein, Dedushka."
Fantastic. Oh, just incredible. It's so fantastic that you have that history there to be able to pass on to your kids. And great foresight that your grandfather had, but back at that as he was reflecting on his life, at how important it would be to, well, one, document what the past was like, because I think it's very important that we understand how things have been so that we've got something to look forward to into the future to see how we can possibly correct some of the screw-ups that we're making, as humanity. But it is one of those things that I've always been, as I've grown older, incredibly worried about, is that I hope that I haven't seen the last of the sort of great hunting opportunities around the world. I've been very fortunate to experience even a lot of great stuff in Africa in the last decade, and I know that it's not even close to what it was like in your grandfather's days. And I just hope that when another 3 decades passed, that it still exists in some form, and hopefully in a better form than it does today. I mean, there's some serious problems and struggles going on with regard to wildlife and its management and the explosion of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll since we're wrapping this up, I'll leave you and I'll leave your audience with one thing about the project. The project is not about me, Robbie Kroger, and I think that's what I love about the project. The project is about us. The project's about us, the hunting community, and about telling everyone else's stories. I could care less, my story is the impetus behind the project, but that's where it stops. This is about us as a community and showcasing that us. And I think that's what's resonating, and I love it, and I can't wait. I can't wait to tell your guys' stories, because you two together, I can just already see it. It's going to be an amazing story.
We'd love to host you over here.
I can't wait to get to the UK, because the stories there of old school gamekeepers. You've got some very cool young females that are in the hunting industry, like Jenna Gearing and Rachel Carey, and just got. I just can't wait. It's going to be so cool. And plus, having a bunch of British accents on the episodes will be pretty cool too.
I found the stalker for you, the old stalker, because we're going to have him on the podcast soon. He actually lives very close to us. His name's Hamish, and he's 70s, so maybe late 70s now, and he was personal friends with A.A. Gill, who was the great writer who died last year, the year before, who was also a hunter, and he knew him before he was a hunter. And I was speaking. I've known him for years, and I just happened to be in his house the other night speaking, and I meant to be there for 5 minutes to ask him a question, and I was there for an hour, and he was showing me some of the old pictures from back in the 1880s of the gamekeepers up in the hill there, and he was explaining how things had changed, and then drinking whiskey with A.A. Gill, and I was like, Hamish, you're coming on the podcast, so
amazing.
Yeah, he is the man for that. He's fantastic.
You don't have to go far to find characters in this neck of the woods.
Robbie, it has been tremendous to have you on today. I genuinely do want to do another podcast at some point in the future to talk about your sort of day-to-day work and the oil spill. It's not hunting related, but this podcast isn't just hunting. We're hunting, fishing, great outdoors, wildlife conservation. That's what we love. So I think that's a perfect fit. So if you can spare us some time in the coming months, we'd love to talk about your work and what's happened there.
I think people would be particularly interested to find out what's going into the future of obviously restoring all these places that were destroyed, but also what the challenges that you faced in the very early days, which I imagine was probably quite
must be mind blowing. To think how you're going to tackle
to get your head around. I mean, off the top of your head, how many miles of coast was affected? Well, and wetlands, I guess.
Oh my gosh, I can't give you a number because I'll be lying. You just think about how convoluted Louisiana is,
I guess,
and all the wetlands. It's just
It must be thousands of miles. It must be thousands,
maybe
tens of thousands of miles,
hundreds. But we'll talk about that on another show. But we encourage everybody to go and check out Blood Origins on all of your platforms, and go onto YouTube and watch them. And if they like your Facebook page, then hopefully it comes up in your feed so you can see them as you're releasing them.
Absolutely.
It's been a fantastic conversation today. I am very much looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person at some point in the future.
Yes, sir.
Robbie,
thank you. I'm just so humbled. Again.
Absolute pleasure. The pleasure's all ours.
And that is it for another 2 weeks. Don't forget that you can listen to the show on loads of platforms. It is on SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube, Acast, Podbean. I can't even remember them all now. It's the list. Oh, Spotify. Spotify is the big one now. So actually, next to iTunes, Spotify is the second largest streaming for podcasts on the planet, and it's done that in about 3 months. So Spotify.
They did have a lot of people listening to it to begin with.
It had a head start. But yeah, no, Spotify. I mean, I actually now consume a lot of my podcasts through Spotify because it works with my Sonos system in my house. So yeah, it's pretty good. And if you are a YouTube listener and you're trying to make this more portable, then those are the ways that you can listen to it. It is also on YouTube for anyone else. But
there's actually a surprising number of people who do listen to it on YouTube. So if you're just a YouTube listener, thank you. You can be more portable.
We only put it on YouTube because there's like an automatic upload to YouTube because we don't at this current moment in time, but it is changing in the future, is that we just do not have the time to do videos of every single one and then edit it afterwards because it takes so much time.
But we're going to come up with a system where we can.
We're going to come up with a system where we can do it in the future, so that the YouTube people, there's something a bit more exciting going on for you. But it is an audio show after all. So if you want to find out some more information about us, go to allthewsthepacebrothers.com, where you'll find our shop, and there's some really cool stuff to get, which is including our coffees and our t-shirts and our car stickers. And the car stickers, we're going to be running competitions very, very soon with a car sticker, so get yours now, and then if we spot them out and about, then there'll be some really cool prizes coming your way. They're £1.40, I think, and then it's like 50p postage for the car stickers. And the coffee as well, they're each assigned with a charity, so you'll be doing your bit if you purchase a coffee.
And, well, we like it, otherwise we wouldn't sell it. We spent quite a lot of time selecting the right coffee for us to actually package up like this for our followers and listeners, and to assign to the charities. But it must be good because quite a number of people have come back for
we've had
many orders. So.
Many reorders of the coffee, which is, and you know what, we've actually, it's one of those strange things in your office. Obviously you've got all this coffee, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't really want to open all my stock and use it in the coffee.
I did open a new one while you were away.
But we have actually been drinking it because it is the best tasting coffee in the office.
We had a whole heap of stuff that was there for samples and all bits and pieces, and we were trying to basically get rid of it. And we were making blends and drinking that in the weeks before, and
some of them were disgusting.
It really sucked.
Yeah, it really did.
But now we're on to the good stuff, which is our stuff. So definitely go and check that out because it helps us, but it also supports great causes as well.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't know if you've checked it out, or you might not have. All the people that donated to help with the
Lawairu,
sanctuary, they sent us a message on Facebook and on Instagram, saying thank you, like a personal message to us with loads of babies crawling all over the place, saying a massive thank you. And we are going to look to basically do another round of funding later this year, because we want to do the same again. There's no point doing it once. We might as well.
So your money got there.
Your money 100%
and you can
got there.
see in that video where your money went, because they just recently saved a couple of new baby chimps.
I think it was like 10.
Oh, it's heartbreaking to watch. But go especially if you donated some money, go and find that video on Facebook or Instagram, because it's a thank you to everybody.
It was almost $1,000 that we raised in like it was barely no time at all, and that was basically from all of our listeners on here. And that money has made a massive difference. And our goal at the time was to raise, I think, 650. And that was enough to feed and house and look after one chimpanzee for the entire year. That was the idea, but obviously the money can be used for other things, which it has, because it's been, I think, used to rescue these new babies, which become big. And the whole idea of these things is unfortunately, these babies are quite psychologically damaged, and
because they've been ripped away from their dead mothers. They
rehabilitate them, and the whole goal is to release these back into the wild, or to have as wild life as possible, because the bottom line is they're wild animals and they need to go back to where they came. So you can't really ask for much more than that.
No, it was a great cause. So go and check that out. We're going to have to run. You will hear from us. In fact, the next show might very well go out a bit early because we're going to be away, as we said at the very start. So you might be hearing from us in about a week.